Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this latest teaching session in the course on technology and the future of medicine. Today we have the honor of talking with Dr. David Pearce. So we had a very successful Future Day, and one of the points brought up there is rather intriguing to think about, and that is life of human beings is considered as a kind of cartoon storyboard, if you will. You know, there's a beginning, middle, end, and you know, what does the story look like? And the idea that there must be a struggle, that there's, you know, some problem, a struggle, resolution, and that's a really good story. If you get rid of the struggle, it's hard to get an appealing story out of one's life. And you know, I was sort of flying by the seat of my pants, and it was late at night and so on. And what I said is the struggles will change. There will still be struggles, and they'll be satisfying, and it'll be rewarding to solve these problems. But what the problems are and what the struggles are will change. But I have to admit that if we come to the point where there are no struggles anymore, that might be a problem. So what do you think? Do you think we're going to reach that point? I myself don't. I think we can't predict what the future struggles will be, but they'll still be there. So what do you think about the struggle, absence of struggle, storyboard of your life? Is your life going to be too boring without the peaks and valleys that make for a good cartoon David Pearce story of his life now?
Well, remember, one can, even in paradise, one can make the dips and the peaks arbitrarily sharp. Though it's, of course, extraordinarily simplistic, just you know, draw a kind of scale -10, +10, and say that in the future, hedonic range can have an upper bound of 100 and a lower bound of 80. Nonetheless, I think it gives the point that if we consider it important to have struggle and stress and conflict and all the rest of it, we can still do so with a default condition of sublime bliss that in principle, at any rate, is orders of magnitude richer than what's feasible today. To what extent one really needs to kind of reenact the struggles of the African savannah, but on a much higher plane, I don't know. I mean, is there really any need to have peaks and troughs if one can be having, you know, a pretty nearly perfect experience? I'm not sure. But for those who are in love with struggle and conflict, and they enjoy playing competitive sports and games or electronic games, there will still be, you know, unlimited capacity to do so.
One of the other ideas, and actually Nader, who wasn't here for Future Day, has just entered the room. He might be interested in some of these things. Not only the idea of the absence of struggle in the future, but the absence of absolute risk. I mean, risk of things like making a complete fool of yourself. Like in theory, if I'm doing a good job at public speaking now, the reason is that internally I know there's a certain percentage of chance that I could make a complete bloody fool of myself, and that makes me a better speaker, right? If that risk is gone, then somehow that edge that makes me a good speaker in theory wouldn't be there because of this risk of making a complete bloody fool of myself being gone. So what about that? Do you think, do we need real risk, or could somebody live their entire life realizing that all the things we used to worry about, there is no risk of those things happening, you know? There are safeguards, there are guarantees everywhere. You know, you're not going to feel pain, you're never going to want for valuable things, you know, the whole post-scarcity, you know, abundance thing. Is it a problem if there is no guarantee of risk? If you wake up in the morning and you have nothing to worry about, you know, like everything's positive. You're trying to think, well, geez, what should I worry about? And you can't think of a single thing. Is that a problem? That's sort of life turned on its head, right? We've always been worried about the things that we're worrying about. Should we worry about not having anything to worry about? Is that a problem? The absence of risk, the absence of worry?
I think one wants an absence of risk in a controlled environment, and until one can have the controlled environment, it's necessary to still have the functional analogues of anxiety, even low mood, the functional analogues of boredom, for example, because otherwise one loses critical insight. But increasingly, yes, it will be possible to offload anything unpleasant or mundane. Everyone thinks of the strong Turing piece. This idea that there doesn't seem to be, at least in conventional AI and computer science, any indispensable computational role played by the more textures of anxiety, of low mood and anger. And though clearly we don't want to zombify, so to speak, what's worthwhile in our lives, equally there are a whole bunch of mundane things, mundane activities, unpleasant thoughts and feelings that the sooner we can offload onto smart prostheses, the better.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, that recent article about you can imagine super sentient AI not being evil. All the reasons that it wouldn't be is that it wouldn't make the logical mistakes that human beings frequently do, that make us have conflict and so on. Nader, would you like to come up and ask some questions? What's the worst that could happen? Come on. Yeah, he's still in his surgical greens and everything, so I know, but you're probably more prepared than some others in the room. So, anyway, yeah.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Hi.
My name is Nader. I guess the question I'll ask, because I was thinking about it on the way here, I don't know if you have any experience in it or not, but I deal with, I guess, ex vivo lung perfusion system, which primarily deals with removing the lungs, putting them on a machine, and getting them to pretty much breathe outside of the body while we repair any damage that occurs. So what I see, hopefully in the future, is do you think it would be possible, maybe sometime in the future, we would be able to get to a level where we can use our own organs instead of requiring a donor, for instance, and taking our own lungs, putting it on a machine such as this, repairing whatever damage that we have, and prolonging our longevity, I guess, or like our survival rate. So instead of only surviving until 70, or for instance, you were deemed, oh, you're gonna die like at 50 because your heart is not functioning anymore and we can't find a donor, well, now you can actually take your own heart out, put it on this machine, and repair it to almost 100% again. And then now you can keep going.
Yes, that's a nice idea. As you know, in bioethics, there has been some controversy over so-called savior siblings, when parents actually choose to have another child to enable their existing child with some terrible disease to have a chance of survival. But yes, it might be possible to, yes, make sure you had spare replacement organs on tap and available if needed. And not merely that, too, some kind of automated off-site backup or mind files, so that if you had a stroke or any other form of neurological accident, that you could be rehabilitated. So yes, that's one possibility.
So which one do you think will probably see first? Is it like a donor pool of like your own DNA, you just go in there and then they can create your own organ from your own DNA, or something to deal with more like artificial intelligence, like nanotechnology? Like having certain things like going into your body and repairing those like micro issues like cancer, for instance, or just like a tumor cell, or like on a DNA level, for instance.
My hunch is the latter, but as I said, it's a hunch, and one tends to be, terribly vague about these time scales, as has been said, and it's worth repeating. One tends to overestimate the effects of change in the short run and underestimate it in the long run. And yeah, when it comes to, is this going to be 15, 20 years away, or 35, 40, 50 years away? I don't know.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So coming next is Emily. She's a nephrology trainee who's only been working with me for a few days. I think if her eyes are quite wide, it's because every day there's something like unexpected, like talking to some great philosopher from the UK. So anyway, here she comes.
Thank you. Hello.
Hi.
I suppose in the same kind of vein, because I'm a physician, I'm most interested in your theories around eliminating disease and suffering. And I was wondering about who would make the decisions as to which diseases or which conditions should be eliminated from the genetic pool.
Yes, a good question. China has a very different approach and history from the UK or Europe. If one is very much in the individualist tradition, one has to assume that it's going to be prospective parents. I think there are a very wide range of disorders and conditions that there isn't any serious doubt that ideally we should eliminate them. Cystic fibrosis, sickle cell disease, the standard genetic diseases. I know that there are certainly, there have been cases of deaf parents who have wanted to have deaf children, and want to situations like that. But there is actually going to be quite a fair degree of consensus as the reproductive revolution unfolds that certain genetic disorders and conditions, we do need to phase them out. What becomes very controversial is this idea, what about low mood, as we're starting to decipher genes that are implicated in hedonic set points? Are we going to want to phase out the predisposition to low mood? And even though depression is at least as devastating quality of life as cystic fibrosis, many people are profoundly uneasy or even hostile to the idea that we might actually phase out mood. And I think this will change with time. I said right now, for example, Jehovah's Witnesses who choose not to allow blood transfusions for their children, this is widely regarded as child abuse. Could it be the case in some future era that prospective parents who choose to have kids naturally to bring more suffering, pain, depression into the world, could this be regarded as akin to child abuse? It's possible. It just seems for the foreseeable future, it's sociologically extremely unlikely. And I think with probably what's most realistic is prospective parents will sort of be starting off with pre-implantation genetic screening, but ultimately genetic engineering will be taking the decisions, guided, one hopes and trusts, by professionals and genetic experts.
One of the other things you mentioned earlier was that some of the greatest minds that we've had have been within the autism spectrum. Do you think with elimination of certain diseases, as some people would consider autism one to be eliminated, whether or not we might lose some of the greater minds secondary to elimination of disease, or lose other characteristics that might be associated somehow genetically with something bad?
It's certainly possible. If, for example, we were to try to phase out any predisposition to Asperger's. Yes, it looks at the number of Fields medalists or Nobel laureates who clearly fall within the Asperger spectrum. This potentially a great loss, but in many ways it is the kind of, very crudely speaking, Aspergerish attributes that lend themselves best to AI and kind of medical smart systems, whereas at least for the foreseeable future, which is far harder to program classical digital computers or to train up so-called neural networks to replicate the kind of empathetic, cooperative, problem-solving intelligence associated with people with lower AQs. I mean, ideally, one would be able to switch cognitive style as appropriate. But other things being equal, if one is, let's say, a caring, empathetic, sensitive person who cared a lot about feelings and perspectives of others, I mean, in terms of brain power that could be used solving mathematical problems, yeah, there's an opportunity cost there.
Okay, thank you very much.
So at what point do you see medicine shifting from the influence being maybe primarily around diseases and therapies to actually human enhancement being the main focus of medicine? And at that point, a lot of the choices that you're talking about now, it becomes crucially important, for instance, to be eliminating diseases, but not to be eliminating variations in human abilities that we've never thought of as diseases. For instance, distraction. You know, many of the most creative people in the world were easily distracted. They complained about noises in adjoining rooms and so on. They were big users of wax earplugs even hundreds of years ago and so on. And so that sensitivity to distraction, the fact that you couldn't make your mind just focus on one thing, that if there was a noise out there, you incorporated that into your thought patterns, was presumably important to creativity itself. And so if you somehow eliminated that, if you found the genes and so on that made people able to singularly focus on one task and sort of shut out everything else, then human beings would become less creative. But isn't this then just part of a bigger problem? I went to a concert last night that was great, but the conductor for a portion of it was short, and he referred to how short he was, like very, very commonly. So this was his big joke that, you know, he was, you know, destined to be taller, but it never happened, and so on. But what if all of society thought like that, and suddenly there were no short people? You know, how will these sorts of decisions be made of what is uniformly desirable to get rid of, and what will be sort of the innocent bystander, you know, affect the unintended consequences of changes in future human beings where we actually lose more than we gain in making these, you know, optimization decisions? How do you think that's going to work out?
And height is an example where, yes, one can assume that there will be much greater uniformity, that 100 years hence, it's not as though society is going to be dominated by people 4 or 5 meters tall, and essentially, yes, one must assume that people will be clustered more tightly today around me. But as I said, I know some people are exercised by these issues, but something like height, will it matter if most men are around, for example, 2 meters or just over 2 meters tall, because that is what we are predisposed to think of as the ideal. I don't see any really big downside there. You touched on a fair number of points there. Starting at the beginning, when are we going to stop thinking of mediation? When are we going to start thinking of enhancement? I just tend to think that as hopes, quality of life, subjective quality of life, default hedonic tone, intellectual performance becomes richer, we will recognize that what a dreadfully impoverished conception of mental health we have today. And it's true, so many people who are nominally well, who aren't under the care of the social services or psychiatric medicine, a lot of the time are leading malaise-ridden lives. Yes, I think our successors, possibly even our elderly selves, will look back on existing life and just think how, just dreadfully malaise-ridden and impoverished. So I wouldn't see it as a switch from remediation to enhancement so much as a much more generous conception of what mental and physical health involves.
Yes. If you think about human creativity like in song lyrics, if many fewer people were sad, then there's a certain category of song that would no longer be written. If hardly anyone is sad, then hardly any sad songs are going to be written. And you can say, well, we'd lose something, I guess, but then, there's probably an infinite number of variations on happy songs and, expansive songs and hopeful and optimistic songs, and, but some of it comes back to politics, doesn't it? Like, is diversity in all senses desirable? Not just diversity like racial diversity and, but like diversity of life experience and so on. Well, if you think that is desirable, then you need people experiencing all these various things that people experience now. And we don't have any choice now. We can't limit diversity. Do you think diversity is a general good and should always be promoted, or will we reach a time where what diversity is, we'll still promote it, but what we're promoting will change? And it won't include people who've had, lengthy suffering experiences, because there won't be anybody like that anymore, and we won't think that there should be people like that. So we'll lose a part of diversity, but that's okay, I guess.
Yeah, there are countless different forms of suffering, and yes, nature has engineered us so that humans are capable of being desperately unhappy and anxious about a far greater diversity of things than our primate ancestors were. But yes, as I said, I think it will be actually fantastic when any form of unpleasant experience can be eliminated. But though in one sense, yes, a loss of diversity, there are far richer forms of diversity that are going to be on offer in future. Trouble is that our impoverished imagination can't, heaven can sound a bit boring, the traditional heaven. But other things being equal, the happier one is that, the richer one's default hedonic tone, not merely is one more motivated, one is also sensitive to a broader range of potentially rewarding stimuli. Good mood is associated with approach behavior rather than behavioral suppression. So once again, other things being equal, it does seem likely that diversity will increase.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't done justice to some of your earlier points. This business of distractibility. One of the consequences of a very narrow conception of intelligence as measured by IQ tests is that it doesn't such a conception doesn't cover the kind of creativity, mind reading, the kinds of thought, for example, one often has if one is drifting off to sleep. And why is it one often has some of one's good ideas drifting off to sleep? Because that's in a hypercholinergic state. Many of today's so-called smart drugs or nootropics that are in the news, what they really are is psychostimulants, which, crudely speaking, tend to increase signal-to-noise ratio and may enable one to focus on one's essay or something like that. But what we really need is a much wider array of pharmacological tools and agents that are available so one can shift from being focused to diffuse, to easily distractible, and of course much richer education in pharmacology, psychopharmacology, how to use these tools sensibly and responsibly.
So let me ask you something that you are an expert on, and more so than anyone in the room, and that is philosophy. Because...
oh, if only, if only.
So, do you think, I've heard it suggested that philosophy is going to become a much more popular subject for study in the future? I mean, it's one thing to say we'll all be writing poetry and novels at the top of Maslow's pyramid of needs because robots will be doing everything else, but probably that's not what we'll be doing, but somehow philosophy would provide us with some tools to figure out things that we can't easily figure out other ways or to make sense of them. What's your sense of that? Is philosophy becoming more respectable, more useful? Do you see it as a kind of career for the future, or is it a dead end? In the 60s, it was regarded as something entirely stupid to major on in college because you'd never get a job and never make any money and so on. So has it changed? And is it changing?
I mean, ideally, I think won't be any place for philosophy at all. We'll have sorted the problems out. We're nowhere near that stage yet. And as you know, in the sciences, the term philosophy, philosophical, is often used in a derogatory sense. Mm-hmm. But yes, all of us have philosophical views. The problem is that some people have examined philosophical views and other people imagine that they have transcended philosophy. So yeah, I think it's good if scientists, although they won't be happy to hear this, mic up on history of philosophy and also contemporary philosophy. Sadly, it would be also very good if more academic philosophers were to immerse themselves more in science. It's an unfortunate 20th century phenomenon, this divorce between science and academic philosophy. I can imagine any scientist listening will be snorting at this. What of philosophers to teach scientists? But whether one looks back into 20th century history and the grip of naive positivism of the Copenhagen interpretation in quantum mechanics, or one looks this century to the debates over M theory and the landscape, let's say, in theoretical physics today, scientists are up to their necks in philosophy, but in many cases they don't recognise it. But as I said, sadly, it's also the case too that there are plenty of philosophers whose nodding acquaintance with science doesn't extend beyond A-level physics, so to speak. So yes, I think one would hope there's going to be a much richer cross-fertilisation again. Yes.
Now, I've had an interesting experience the past 3 days. I have a video, as you know, about the Fermi paradox and the idea that it's the lack of diversity, choosing the wrong leaders, choosing leaders who are too aggressive and kill each other off, that accounts for the fact that alien civilizations haven't come to visit us. But in the comment trail on YouTube, first of all, it's fascinating to me. This is the first video I've ever had with more thumbs down than thumbs up, because I think the elitists out there don't like the idea that I'm blaming them, that I'm blaming elitism for the Fermi paradox. And so there have been some really remarkable, there are moderated comments. There have been some I didn't post where people were using their real names and the most scatological, primitive, anti-female sentiment. But then there was something the other day that really kind of appealed to me, and this is the idea that the whole universe has kind of biological rules. That the reason we have not encountered aliens in our particular part of the universe is that's the way the universe is made. There is like a central focus of life in each part of the universe. Let's say there might be 8 or 10 in the entire universe, and they're so far apart that they can never reach each other and never logically communicate with each other. And maybe that's the natural structure of the universe, and you can think that when you look up there at the stars and so on, it doesn't exactly look random, and so maybe it's not. Maybe there are rules. So what do you think about that? Could there be a kind of plan for the entire universe? There's a kind of, biology of the cell, of the body, of the earth, and so on. Could it extend to is there biology of the entire universe, or is that ridiculous?
Yeah, there's this idea, the principle of mediocrity, we ought not to be special. And yet it could be, paradoxically, that the principle of mediocrity pretty much guarantees that we're alone, in the sense we need to know what percentage of life-supporting Hubble volumes, in what percentage does primordial life rise more than once. And it may be that it's actually extremely low, because if you look at the history of life, right at the very outset, we still don't have a credible account of how information-bearing self-replicators could have got off the ground. At some stage or other in the various suggestions that have been made, there always seems to be some extraordinarily thermodynamically improbable process. And so it may simply be that we are typical in being alone in a Hubble volume. So, yes, that said, that would be my personal favoured candidate explaining the Fermi paradox. We ought to know more. I think it quite likely we will crack the origins of life this century, and yeah, we ought to know more, I would think, in the next few decades.
Yeah. Nader, do you want to come up? Yeah, come here. Yeah. Yeah, because we don't want the video to show that I did all the talking. That would be like the worst video ever, so save us from that.
Just a quick question. So I'm just thinking back a little bit about like the great wonders of the world and certain things that people have come up with, for instance, like, conspiracy, either aliens. The way I see it is two things. It's either, yes, we had visitors in the past that have helped human beings build these great like buildings, I guess, or structures that are inconceivable because of the material that they had back then or the technology that they had back then, or B, that humans were actually very intelligent back then. So now my question is like, what has happened? Like, it almost seems like if there was like this great intelligence back then with certain minds or certain human beings possessed that were capable of thinking and creating these structures with the limited supply that they had, it seems like like we've kind of like dumbed down a little bit, I guess, if you want to say it, or is it like our intellect or intelligence has kind of like, you know, like changed into different things? Like, I don't know how to phrase the question, I guess. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, and yet my inclination is that there are far more extremely smart people around today, proportionately, than has ever been the case, not least something as basic as good nutrition. Yeah. I mean, if you, and it is very simplistic, if you look at human height, human stature as a kind of proxy for physical, mental, and intellectual health, with the agricultural revolution, stature declined. It's only very, very recently that stature has increased again, and now in a handful of societies, such as Scandinavia, the class differential between people in terms of height has leveled off. And the Flynn effect is well known. There's a secular increase in IQ scores throughout the last century. I think IQ is a very poor proxy for true full spectrum intelligence, but let's pretend that this is the case. No, I think in terms of rich stimuli, education, decent nutrition and health, yes, overall human intellectual performance is increasing. So, yeah, I suppose I'm, in one sense, arguing against your thesis. I suppose I could play devil's advocate and take the other line.
All right, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
This is a really quick question just about, we're talking about transhumanism, but I was just wondering what the role would be of animals and like how we would include animals in that picture of transhumanism, if there is a role, and kind of what it looks like. Similar things to other points brought up is, do the same things apply in terms of favoritism or selection of certain traits, certain animals that evolve with us that we perceive to be desirable in a certain way, or that have desirable attributes and things like that, and also what the need of animals would be depending on our perception of them. So if we get to a point where we live in a transhumanist society where we've evolved past a lot of emotional needs, would we need pets? Would we need agriculture? Kind of, yeah, what would the world look like in that sense?
I think there are two parts to this question. One, though, is the essential moral issue. At the moment, in factory farms and slaughterhouses, we are treating non-human animals absolutely abysmally. Non-human animals with the cognitive capacities and critically the ability to suffer are being systematically abused throughout their lives. And I think there's an absolute moral imperative there to get factory farms and slaughterhouses shut. Beyond that, what should we be aiming for? Should we aim to preserve an idealized version of existing Darwinian life? The case of our future wildlife parks, should we aim to preserve starvation, disease, the horrors of predation, or should we potentially aim for compassionate stewardship of the rest of the living world? In the longer term, do we really want to preserve in any shape or form existing forms of Darwinian life, human and non-human? Personally, I am extremely skeptical there, to which some people would say, well, what arrogance of humans to say which species should or shouldn't walk the earth, but we're already massive to meet the rest of the living world. We're systematically abusing millions of sentient beings who are akin to infants and small toddlers. Yes, I think we should face up first to our moral responsibilities to non-humans.
Great, thank you.
Okay, well, I think that's probably it. Thank you very, very much, David, and we look forward to the next time. I don't know how to ensure that the internet connection is optimal, but it often has been. I don't know. So I'm sorry for the parts of today where you're getting the echoes.
Just now, one interruption. I'm worried that my opening comments could be misconstrued as extremely sexist. I think they probably were worth putting in the context of this rather odd or eccentric view I have electing or female political leadership. Otherwise, my rather sweeping sexist generalizations could mortally offend some people, I'm worried.
Yeah, well, no, I'm actually thinking of maybe editing this and not having, the video be the whole thing, just because, the audio has gotten better, and I think maybe our thought patterns and maybe the whole hour has just gotten better. We've all gotten better during this past hour. So, yeah, I might do that. I might make a shorter video.
I totally trust your judgment. I never watch myself or listen to myself, so I'm in your very capable hands.
Okay, great. Well, we look forward to the next time. So this coming fall, we'll do this again and on and on and on. And thank you very much. And so I always learn a lot every time. And thank you very much for today. So that's it, and we'll see you next term.
Thank you to your students.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.